Today on the Purpose-Based Retirement Roth IRA Planning after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, should you be filing a joint return or filing separately, and where is the market going next?
Welcome to the Purpose-Based Retirement with certified financial planner practitioner Casey Weade.
It's not how much we make during the good times, it's how much we keep during those really bad times.
Casey leads a team of financial advisors with decades of experience, helping families across the country retire with the confidence they deserve. The Purpose-Based Retirement assigns every dollar you've saved a specific purpose to meet a key retirement need.
Whatever risk you faced, we've got a plan for that.
Stay tuned and learn how you can look forward to a worry-free, purpose-based retirement.
Thanks for joining us here on the Purpose-Based Retirement. I am Lee Kelso. That is Casey Weade, certified financial planner and the president of Howard Bailey Financial. You know, one of the holy grails of an effective retirement plan is predictable regular income. And people are often turning to a tool called fixed indexed annuities to get that done. And you have some concerns about this, right?
Yeah, I think anytime that there's a major financial product like a fixed indexed annuity, or maybe it's a mutual fund or managed money or equities. A few years ago is real estate investment trusts, and we saw this huge rise in popularity. And now as more investors are seeking a bond alternative, they're seeking guaranteed income, they're seeking protection because they feel that the market's becoming overbought. Now they're looking for places that can offer these types of benefits, and a fixed indexed annuity can do that. However, we need to understand the pros and the cons of these vehicles. I think most importantly, it's very easy to explain the pros and the benefits of any financial vehicle and really get those greed glands pumping, but we also, I think more importantly, in order to make sure it's a good decision for our future, we need to understand the downside, and we need to understand the risk, and we need to understand the cons. Once we understand that, then we can determine if those pros are really worth making that decision for us to move forward. But these typically aren't the things that you're hearing from annuity pushers out there that are trying to sell you these types of products. They're only sharing with you the pros and maybe one or two of the downsides or cons. And this is what leads to most people, and this is really the number one reason we find that people don't like annuities they've been sold in the past, is that they didn't understand them, and more importantly, they didn't understand the downside of them when they were ultimately sold to them in the first place. So I want to share kind of a list of those different things that you should be aware of and looking out for if you're getting ready to buy a fixed indexed annuity.
So one of those factors is the market participation. That's one of the key elements here, right? You participate as the market climbs, but you're protected as the market declines. However, that's also part of the problem.
Yeah, well, and I think this is just not explained very well, and it's often sold that, well, you get all the upside of the market, none of the downside. Market goes up, you go up, and the market goes down, you don't go down. Well, that sounds great. However, we want to know how far up can I actually go? And it's always going to be limited in some way. Otherwise, there's no vehicle out there that's going to give you all the upside of the market, none of the downside. Otherwise, everybody would put their money there. And there is no such thing. However, if we understand how it's limited, then we can determine if it's a good product or not, or a good additive to our mix of investments in the first place. And one of the ways that it's typically limited is in some type of participation rate. So you receive a percentage of the market's returns or an index return such as the S&P 500. So in the S&P 500, I know a couple products out there right now. There's one company offering a 20% participation rate in the S&P 500, another company offering over a 70% participation rate in the S&P 500. That's a huge margin. Well, which one do you think pays the advisor the largest commission? It's the one that offers probably the 20% rate,
yeah,
not the 70% rate that's actually better for the client. So anytime you're being pitched some type of fixed indexed annuity, or any product for that matter, you want to know why this one in particular. Has it credited more in interest to its clients and customers than any other product out there? Or what's your commission? Why not ask the person you're sitting down with, what are you making? And now, can you share with me 2 or 3 other products that might be similar to this one so that you can share with me why this one's the best? And I'd like to know what you're getting paid if you use one of these other ones at the same time. You want to make sure you're making the best decision for your future. Sometimes it's limited in cap as well, where there's some products out there that offer 6 to 8% caps, and there's other ones out there that are limiting your gains to 2% a year.
So a little, be skeptical, do a little shopping.
Exactly.
Okay,
just like bad mutual funds, there's good ones and bad ones. We need to understand what all those intricacies really are before we can make that decision.
So with a fixed indexed annuity, you're typically putting your money in the trust of an insurance company, which means that is a critical choice as well, right?
Well, it's a huge decision because that is ultimately how you're going to get your money back, right? It's the reliability of that insurance company. This is why in all the disclosures it says you have to rely on the claims paying ability of that insurance company itself. So you want to know how strong that company is. Do I have a good company? Do I have a bad company? One of the services we pay for is called Vital Signs. And Vital Signs gives us, just like it says, the vital signs of all those different companies that are out there today we could potentially be utilizing for these types of vehicles. And there's ratings such as the S&P ratings, the Moody's ratings, AM Best ratings. However, they're kind of confusing for a lot of people because they have A ratings, they all do it a little bit differently, they're B rated. What does this really mean? And so we use something called the Comdex as well. Comdex gives us a percentile combining a lot of this different research from these different firms to give you a real good hard number based on a percentage. For instance, Nationwide is a company that carries a surplus capital of about 11%. So they have $111 on hand for every 100 that they owe. Every company has surplus capital. Now, there's another company, American Equity. They have about 6% surplus. So they have 106% on hand for every 100 that they owe. American Equity's Comdex rating is 60, Nationwide's 89. So which one would you rather do business with? You need to know these things in order to make sure you're with a company that's going to be around for a very long time.
Yeah, and another thing you need to understand is exactly what is your liquidity needs, because your money is going to be locked up for a little while.
Yeah, this is a problem that I've seen time and time again, where there's a misunderstanding on how much liquidity we really have with this product, this vehicle that's been positioned. I know Marshall Johnson, our vice president, recently sat down with a couple that said we hate these things. They had two annuities, they had a variable annuity, they had an indexed annuity, and they said we can't get our money out. And when we looked at it, they didn't have an emergency fund. They didn't have any place they could go for a big chunk of cash if they had an emergency. So what we're doing now is taking advantage of the free withdrawals we have every year and starting to build up an emergency reserve fund so that they have some place they can go for emergencies. Typically, your liquidity is limited to somewhere between 5 and 10% of the account value. Well, that's still better than a bond, right? You know, with a bond, you're only going to be able to get the interest and then potentially incur a very severe penalty if interest rates rise. We have a little bit more control over those penalties and probably more liquidity with a fixed indexed annuity. It's just understanding what that liquidity is in the first place, again, in order to make the best decision for you in your future.
And another risk that you need to be aware of is really who's the owner of this item, who owns this annuity.
Yeah, and this is something that I find a lot of financial advisors overlook when they're positioning those annuities. Most often, for instance, when we open a brokerage account, we want to open it jointly. So we have joints with rights of survivorship. That's very common. One person passes away, the other person takes over, and that's great for a brokerage account, but inside of annuity, there's some caveats. Now, if one of the two of you passes away, you have to continue on with those penalties until the end of the term of that contract. Where if it was owned by a single individual, those penalties go away upon death. Okay, and the same thing with a trust. A trust is another thing that we need to make sure that we exercise caution if we're going to have an annuity own that trust. And one of the things that you can lose is the ability of annuitization, which is one of the biggest benefits of annuity is upon death, is that you can spread out the taxable nature of that account over an extended period of time, 5, 10 years, maybe a lifetime for the heirs. With a trust, a lot of these companies force you to take that distribution in a lump sum, and that can push people into a higher tax bracket and eat up a lot more of that inheritance that you really wanted to leave behind to your heirs rather than Uncle Sam.
And when you buy one of these annuities, you often have the option of a number of different riders to perform a number of different functions. And again, there you have to really know the options.
You know, most of these companies and most of these advisors are really salespeople, and they really are trying to get those greed glands pumping. They're trying to get you sold on the fact that you've got a 7% guarantee, a 5% guarantee, a 10% guarantee, without really getting into the details of what that guarantee really means. For instance, that 7% guaranteed growth rate is really only for income. Okay, so you can only have that for income purposes. You may only be able to take 5% out of that account for the rest of your life. Sometimes 4, maybe 3.5%, and that ends up being effectively at your lifetime. You may only be receiving a 3-4% actual real rate of return, not the 7% that you were promised. Or it's a death benefit. I've seen it with couples that said, well, you know, I wanted to be able to pull that money out for myself. I've got a 7% guarantee. Well, that 7% is only good for your heirs in the case you die. So now either you have to live an extended period of time or you have to pass away in order to get the full value of that contract that you thought you were going to understand. It doesn't mean it's bad. I mean, imagine going back to when you were 40 years old and you picked up a 7% guaranteed growth rate in your 401k, then you retired at 65 and you could pull out 5-6% for the rest of your life. A lot of people would jump all over that.
You bet.
However, many times it's not explained in that way. So you have to understand these tools in order to make sure that you're making the right decision. Understand both the pros and, more importantly, the cons.
So I hope that's why you're going to be one of the next 10 people to jump on the phone and call the number on your screen right now and request a complimentary review of just what's going on in your portfolio. Because there might be an annuity there, and is it going to provide exactly what you need and what you want? Will it do the job you intended? One way to find out is to get that independent advisor's opinion, and that's what you'll get in this complimentary review of your entire retirement portfolio. So jump on the phone, be one of the next 10 people to call and request a consultation with Casey or a member of the Howard Bailey team to learn exactly what's happening in your retirement plan and does it truly fit your needs. All right, we're going to be back in just a second with questions from all of you. Stay with us.
You need a plan to create the retirement you deserve. The first step is to tune in to the Purpose-Based Retirement Radio Hour with Casey Weade and Marshall Johnson. Saturdays at 11 a.m. and Sundays at 1 p.m. on WOWO 107.5 FM or Sunday mornings at 11 on 95.3 MNC.
Let me help you create the retirement you dream of. Go to my website and pick one of 3 education options to get started today. Get a copy of one of my retirement planning books, sign up for a Purpose-Based Retirement live event, or go to the Purpose-Based Retirement University. 2 days of college-level retirement planning instruction. With the right education and proper coaching, I believe anyone can create the retirement they dream of. It all begins with one step. Visit thepurposebasedretirement.com.
Welcome back. This is the part of the program where you guys are the stars. We take questions from viewers here, so let's jump off with Kelly up in Angola.
I'm in the high tax bracket. I've been advised I should not be contributing to a Roth, but I prefer the idea of tax-free growth. When should someone contribute to a Roth instead of a traditional 401k?
Well, there are some general rules of thumb and then some things you should keep in mind. The real rule of thumb has always been, well, what tax bracket are you in today? What tax bracket are you going to be in the future? If you're in a higher tax bracket today, you're going to be in a lower tax bracket in the future, then you should be contributing on a tax-deferred basis, so your traditional IRAs and your 401ks. On the other hand, if you're in a low tax bracket today, you believe you're going to be in a higher tax bracket in the future, then you should be contributing to a Roth IRA. Pay the taxes now, let it grow tax-free, and you can use it in the future when you're in a higher tax bracket. Now, there are some experts out there, Ed Slott, for instance. Ed Slott is one of the premier IRA experts in the country, and he recommends that you contribute to a Roth IRA 100% no matter what. You should always be contributing to a Roth once other factors are taken into consideration other than just your tax brackets, because you have Social Security taxes to take into consideration, you have Medicare premiums to take into consideration. You need to take into consideration a lot of different factors before you make that decision. You also might look at what historical tax rates have been. It may feel like you pay a lot of taxes today, but go back to World War II, go back to times of past. We've seen tax brackets, highest marginal tax bracket in history is, believe it or not, 94%. So there's a very high likelihood that we see higher tax rates in the future than we have today. My way that I treat it is I think we diversify. We diversify our investments, let's diversify our tax buckets, and give ourselves a lot of flexibility. Anytime that nobody has the same exact answer to a question that you ask, then it makes sense to diversify and spread that risk out. So why not set yourself up so that you have taxable funds, tax-free funds, and tax-deferred funds so that you have multiple options to draw from once you actually enter retirement. It's all about diversification in my mind, but ultimately, let's sit down, let's analyze where you sit today and incorporate this into your overall plan. Don't just take this as one piece of a puzzle, because it's got to have all those different puzzle pieces in order to be completed and in order for you to make the right decision.
Wow, 94%.
94%. That's one heck of a tax, isn't it?
That is painful.
Might as well not work anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Let's get over to Payne, Ohio, and Nancy.
Should I move my CDs to municipal bonds for a higher rate of return?
Great question, Nancy, and I think it's one that you really need to be asking yourself, and it's also one that you need to be taking a look at all the pros and all the cons of doing so. You know, municipal bonds are not guaranteed. They're not FDIC insured. That's the biggest factor, I think, here, is you're going from a CD that's FDIC insured and talking about entering a municipal bond that has default risk. I mean, look at Detroit. Look at what's happened in some municipalities in California. A lot of municipalities struggle, and you may not get back your original investment, even if you invest in AAA rated bond. So one, take into consideration the safety, also the liquidity and the penalties you may have to pay. And you say, well, what penalties? I can get my funds out of a municipal bond. I can sell it, right? Well, if interest rates go up, those bond prices could fall. You could be paying very stiff penalties. With a CD, it's a 6-month interest penalty typically. There's some more flexible CDs out there today too. You have more liquidity, you have more flexibility, you have more guarantees. If you have a 10-year municipal bond today, and we see a 10% increase in interest rates over the next few years, you could end up losing 50% of the value in that bond when you go to sell it. So understand the penalties and the risks you're taking moving from CDs over to municipal bonds. Also, I would encourage you to look into corporate bonds if you think bonds are the direction to go, once you take into consideration your actual tax bracket and factor in what the taxable equivalent yield is of that municipal bond. Tax-free sounds great, but if you're in a low tax rate environment in a low tax bracket, you might be better off getting a higher rate of return, not paying that premium for the tax-free nature of the bond, but getting a higher rate of return with a corporate bond, say paying 4% instead of 2%, and 4% taxable for you might be substantially better than 2% tax-free. Maybe you have a CD that's paying 2% a year. After taxes, it's paying 1.7%. Well, maybe that's not worth buying yourself a 10-year 2% investment-grade municipal bond. So a lot of things to think about there, and I think it ultimately comes down to the purpose of those life savings, as it always does.
Yeah, the big picture pays off, right? Yeah. Let's get to Glenna in New Carlisle.
We're planning on moving to Florida after we retire. Should we find an advisor in Florida or get started here in Indiana?
Great question, Glenna. I think it's always important to get the engine started, at least starting to educate yourself about your options and the different types of advisors are out there and who you might want to work with. I don't think today it's nearly as big of a deal working with an advisor from a distance. And matter of fact, a lot of people that we work with prefer working with someone from a distance. I've got clients from Arizona and Alaska, California and Florida and Washington State, clients all over the country that we've worked with and we continue to work with. Some of these individuals started working with us when they didn't live in the area. We've never actually met face to face, but they prefer that distant relationship. Maybe they come from a small town and they don't really want their information to potentially get out there and be known in the community. That's one reason that many individuals decide to work with an advisor from a distance, and we can do that very easily with the technology that we have today. Sometimes actually easier. It's quicker for both parties. Nobody has to get in a car. And we also have the ability to pull up any charts, any graphs, use a virtual whiteboard. All your accounts and everything we need are right there at our fingertips. And you don't want to delay this until after retirement, most importantly. You want to plan for retirement before you're actually in retirement. A lot of individuals make that mistake, and a lot of individuals that made that mistake during the 2008 financial crisis ended up going back to work. So let's get the engine started now, start doing some planning, start doing some vetting, and most importantly, start the education process.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are people who watch these programs online, and that's why the toll-free number is there, so you can give a call at no cost. And I hope you're one of the next 10 people who will dial that toll-free number and have a complimentary review of your financial portfolio. Take a look at what's happening with taxes. Maybe you're paying more than you should, fees that you shouldn't be paying, and how about risk in your portfolio? Something you need to understand very clearly in these kind of uncertain times. So be one of the next 10 people to pick up the phone and call and request a complimentary review of your financial situation. You might meet with Casey or another member of the Howard Bailey team, but either way, you're headed down the road toward a purpose-based retirement. All right, here's our question of the day. Has to do with the odds of having a car accident. We'll explain why that's important to your retirement when we come back.
You need a plan to create the retirement you deserve. The first step is to tune in to the Purpose-Based Retirement Radio Hour with Casey Weade and Marshall Johnson. Saturdays at 11 a.m. and Sundays at 1 p.m. on WOWO 107.5 FM or Sunday mornings at 11 on 95.3 MNC.
The highest educational achievement for a financial planner is the Certified Financial Planner certification. At Howard Bailey, all of our frontline advisors are CFP practitioners. Certified financial planners have been thoroughly vetted with the right education and experience to coach you through the complexities of your retirement. Getting to retirement, that's really the easy part. Find someone with what it takes to get you through this next stage of your life. Would your financial and retirement affairs benefit from a higher level of insight and care? Call us now to find out.
Time to answer our question of the day. Heading into the break, we asked, what are the odds of having a car accident? Casey, what's the answer and how does that apply to my retirement?
Well, this seems a little morbid, but the answer is 3.8%. 3.8% are the odds that you have a car accident. However, 25% are the odds you experience a major market downturn during retirement. And I would argue that those odds might be a little bit higher today. So it might be time for you to understand where you can go for some portfolio insurance to insure against the risk of a major market loss in the near future. Let's just take a look at what the market's done over the last 20 years. We can experience, of course, the last few years have been led into one of the longest bull markets in history, the second longest bull market in history, and some of the biggest percentage gains we've ever seen throughout history. However, throughout history, when we've seen bubbles such as this, we have found that they typically pop, such as they did during the early 2000s and the 2008 financial crisis. If we go back and look at the odds of different things that you typically insure for, we can see the chance of a house fire is 0.3%, chance of death is 0.6%, chance of a car accident is 3.8%. So wouldn't it make sense to insure your portfolio that you require for retirement income against some of these most major risks during retirement? So what we're going to do is we're going to share with you the mechanics of a fixed indexed annuity and how that might work for you. If we look at the basics of a fixed indexed annuity versus the S&P 500, we can see this blue line represents the S&P 500 year after year. This yellow line represents the growth of a fixed indexed annuity with a 50% participation rate. So the first year the market goes up and we're able to go up with the market and lock in our gains. However, the following year the market goes up even more and we don't get all of the gains in the market, but we do lock those things in. Then the market tanks, maybe like it did during the 2008 financial crisis, maybe even 1929 for that matter. When the market goes down, our gains have locked in and we don't suffer those losses like many other individuals do while they're invested in the S&P 500 and in equities in general. When the market begins to rebound, we don't have to make up those losses that would have been suffered if we were in the equity markets, and we experience some of that growth and we begin to grow again. I think the bottom line here is it's not how much you make, it's about how much you protect in those really bad times. To further illustrate that point, we can take a look at how a fixed indexed annuity with a 50% participation rate in the S&P would have performed versus 100% of the gains and the losses in the S&P 500 over the last 17 years. From 2000 through 2017, if we invested $100,000 in the S&P 500, it would have turned into $210,000 by the end of 2017, and we would have endured some fairly stressful times over that 17-year period. If we look at how bond funds performed over that 17-year period, which we want to evaluate because you may be looking into a fixed indexed annuity as an alternative to your bond funds in order to eliminate interest rate risk and default risk, bond funds performed a little bit better actually than equities and returned to $225,000 over that 17-year period, while the fixed indexed annuity returned $230,000 over that 17-year period. So which one of those rides would you rather be on? Would you rather get all the upside and all the downside, or a portion of the upside with none of the downside? To further illustrate what the markets looked like over the last 17 years, we can see the S&P 500 returned a little over 4.2% over the last 17 years, a far cry from the 10% annual rates of return that we've been sold on that the equity markets perform over the long run. We have to begin to define what what is the long run? Because most people would define 10 to 20 years as a pretty good long period of time. Now, had we invested in a fixed indexed annuity with a 50% participation rate, we would have returned better than 4.2% a year. We would have actually returned 4.7% per year over that same 17-year period. Now, during some periods of time, such as 2013, when the market was up 31%, you would have been really happy you were in that S&P 500. However, in the years that were down, such as 2008, when the market was down 38%, you would have got a zero, and you would have been very happy you received a zero in that fixed indexed account. Let's look at this another way. What if you, instead of having a 50% participation rate in the S&P 500, you had a cap on your gains every single year of 6%, so you can never make more than 6% in any given year. Now, over that same time frame, $100,000 would have turned into $190,000 instead of $210,000 had we invested directly in the equity markets. And some might say, well, 6% doesn't seem like much. However, it can be a serious growth. It can offer pretty good growth potential if we can avoid the major losses that we might see if we invest directly in equities. I think one of the most interesting charts I wanted to share with you here is the difference between participation rates and growth rates and cap rates, and what you can really expect moving forward given whatever product you might already have or whatever you're vetting. If we look at a 50% participation rate in the S&P 500 over the last 17 years, it would have returned in that green area 4.76% per year, equivalent to an 8% cap on your gains year after year. In contrast to a 25% participation rate, equivalent to a 3.7% cap rate, and a 2.4% average over that same 17-year period. And today there are companies out there that are offering better than 50% participation rates in the markets that we live in here today, and that might lead you to thinking that a 3 to 5% growth rate can be a good place to put some of your safe money or a good alternative to your bond funds that you might have today in order to get similar performance with less risk. So here are some of the benefits of utilizing a different strategy. 1, you can receive principal protection. 2, market participation. 3, periodically locking in your gains that you've worked so hard to achieve. And number 4 is eliminating interest rate risk. So if interest rates rise, we don't have to worry about those bond prices falling.
So there is a lot to know. Pretty sophisticated tools out there today.
There are a lot different tools out there today than your parents or grandparents utilized. And if you continue to look in the rearview mirror and only utilize those tools that the brokers are positioning in front of you, then you might be kind of like driving down a major highway looking in the rearview mirror. There's a reason that your front windshield is so much larger than that little tiny rearview mirror. It's because we need to look forward and watch for the things that are coming our way and look for new opportunities as the financial world continues to evolve so that we can have the greatest success during our retirement years we possibly can.
So I hope that you'll look forward, and the first step toward that is picking up the phone and being one of the next 10 people to call the number on your screen right now and ask for a review of what's happening in your portfolio. Is a fixed indexed annuity a good plan for you? Don't be confused and just lock yourself out and freeze up and do nothing. That can be one of the worst steps you could take. That's why I'm hoping you'll pick up the phone and call and have a complimentary review of what's going on and how well your existing portfolio can prepare you for the future. The number on your screen right now is the number to call, and if you're one of the next 10 people, a complimentary review is on the table for you. You can meet with Casey, a member of the Howard Bailey team, and get a good understanding what's happening in your future. Hope you'll do that. And we hope that you'll join us next week, right at the same time, for another edition of the Purpose-Based Retirement.